something that not many know about me. But very briefly, I was a federal employee. In 2010, for a few months, I worked for the United States Census Bureau. My job, just a little bit out of college, was to take a list of addresses from the Bureau and go to each of the homes listed, knock on the door, and conduct the interview. Generally, these interviews were meant to be for addresses whose mailed interview form had not been received back to the Bureau by the deadline for whatever reason. I was to then stand on their front porch, ask a representative of the household the questions, and fill out the survey for them so that the Bureau was sure that they received the information from every household, that every resident of the country was counted. Given that at the time I lived quite close to the California State University Northridge, some people I spoke to were college students who told me, oh, they hadn't bothered to fill the form in because their parents back home had included them at their house at home, despite the explicit instructions on the form that it was to be filled out only including the individuals living at a particular address on April 1st, 2010. It in fact clearly stated that college students should not be counted at home, rather at their school residences. This is good to know if any of you expect to have a college student in 2030, I suppose. No matter, I was to duplicate them, and in theory, someone with more authority than I higher up the chain of bureaucracy would somehow sort it out later based on my note. Sometimes the person on the other side of the threshold didn't speak English. Often that person was nervous about this young, white-appearing woman in front of them asking for information about their date of birth and their race. Once I was able to muddle through my interview in okay-ish Hebrew, but for most of the non-English speakers, I'd end up making a note asking someone else to come back and to conduct the interview, usually in Spanish. I hoped that someone with better language skills than mine would be able to reassure them that this was a routine gathering of statistics, that the goal of the United States Census Bureau was not to find undocumented immigrants. I'm not sure that reassurance was actually possible even in 2010. Once, the person who answered the door was an older gentleman, a veteran who angrily insisted that he'd already served his country and that the current president had no business trying to butt into his business, and how dare the government come and ask him these questions. He did not believe me when, as I'd been trained to do, I told him that the census was not, in fact, President Barack Obama's idea, but rather had been mandated by Article 1, Section 2 of the Constitution. The executive branch wouldn't even be the branch of the federal government using the information gathered in the census. It would be used to determine representation of the population in Congress. He didn't believe me. This could not possibly be the first time in this man's life that the census had taken place. Still, he would not answer me. He stood there with arms crossed as I asked each question, glaring, staring me down silently. His interview form was submitted with the refuse to answer box checked off for every question, including his gender. Officially, I was not permitted to assume anything. If he didn't answer, I checked refuse to answer. Eventually, I thanked him for his time and said that someone else may be following up with him, and I walked back to my car as he slammed his door shut. I suppose at least he didn't slam it while I was asking the questions. As I drove away from his house, I started to wonder, why did he seem to think that this was something new? Something that had never happened before? How had he never encountered the census before? Was he forgotten 10 years prior to that in 2000? What about 1990, 1980, 1970, 1960? Perhaps he'd had a wife who simply quietly filled out the form each decade, sending it back to the Bureau without ever mentioning it to him. If so, where was she? What had happened to her? Was this man's anger and confusion really covering an unspoken grief? The United States Census does not gather such information. It is about numbers, not stories. In 2010, it asked how many people lived in a particular residence, what the name, age, birth date, gender, and race of each resident was. The information gathered led to adjustments in the number of seats that 18 states held in the House of Representatives, but it did not record anything about the individual stories or the individual people, where they were born, how they'd come to any given neighborhood, who they were, what they loved, what they might have lost. It was just numbers, just the numbers of people in my neighborhood, not stories. Our Torah, too, you may be aware, is a fan of censai, plural census. Throughout the opening of the book of Numbers, there are several taken. Now, the first few times that the Torah gives us a census, it too seems to be essentially straight numbers, which are gathered for a specific person. How many people are in each of the 12 tribes? How many of them are men between the ages of 20 and 50, and therefore able to form a military for the Israelites? A second census follows immediately, this time focusing solely on the tribe of Levi, specifically counting the men between 30 and 50, so that they may serve the Kohanim in ritual, sacrificial services in the tabernacle. Once again, numbers, not stories. Information gathered for a purpose. Representation in the house, military might, staffing of the tabernacle. As Jews, we both love numbers. We love numbers. We have lots of lucky numbers, 3, 7, 40. But we also don't let things stand at just numbers. Our numbers are meant to combine to make up a story. A 3-verse minimum for our Torah reading. 3 patriarchs, 3 children of Yocheved. 7 days of creation. 40 days and 40 nights waiting for the Torah on Mount Sinai, 40 years wandering the wilderness. These numbers have stories attached to them because people are at the core. In fact, there's a teaching that says that there are 600,000 letters in the Torah corresponding to the 600,000 Israelites recorded in that first census, which is meant to teach that each Jew is one letter of the Torah. If you remove one, the Torah, our story, is no longer complete. That Torah scroll no longer kosher for use in the service. The math is a little bit off. There aren't actually 600,000 letters in the Torah scroll, but the sentiment of the teaching still stands. We don't do numbers without stories because we are stories. And in fact, the Hebrew word for number and the Hebrew word for story share the root of samech ve resh. Which brings me to the final census of the book of Numbers, one that spans the final chapters of the book. This census is meant to be a review and sort of interrupts itself to go over some of the highlighted stories of as names come up. It reminds us of a Nadav and Abihu, the sons of Aaron, who died in Leviticus when they offered a strange fire to God. It reminds us of Korach, who led a rebellion against Moses and who was swallowed up by the earth along with his followers. It recalls the 5 daughters of Zelophehad who lost their father and had no brothers, who found the courage to approach Moses and God and point out inequality that prevented them as women from inheriting their father's property. Little interruptions of story. And like every census in the Torah, this one also rarely names women. And yet it does name some. The 5 I just mentioned, the one and others who dared to believe in hope and agency and possibility. Another such moment of expansion, explanation in this census comes with the reminder of a woman who is key to our entire story, though she is too often overlooked. This census doesn't quite recount her story explicitly, but it does center her in a verse which recalls her, her husband, her children. The name of Amram's wife was Yocheved, daughter of Levi, who was born to Levi in Egypt. She bore Amram, Aaron, and Moses, and their sister Miriam. The name of Amram's wife, the name of the woman whose father was Levi, whose children were Aaron and Moses and Miriam, the team of siblings who would save our entire people, the name of that woman is Yocheved. Her name seems to be centered here in this story census because, quite frankly, we are nothing without her bravery and her defiant hope. You might or might not even remember the actual name Yocheved, but you do remember her and her deeds. She is the one, when faced with Pharaoh's evil decree that all males born to the Israelite slaves be drowned in the Nile, she defied evil and insisted that the Nile would be the place that saved her baby, not the place that killed him. She builds a teva, a basket for her little boy. Placing him in his own tiny little ark, she sets him on the Nile, not in it, and lets her daughter watch until he is lifted to safety by the daughter of Pharaoh and her handmaidens. Miriam offers her mother, the baby's mother, as wet nurse to his new adoptive mother, and her son grows up to be the one whom God charges with the heavy task of freeing our people from bondage. Without her hope, without her daring, there is no Moses. And throughout those opening chapters of Exodus, the Torah doesn't even tell us her name. We don't actually learn her name in the narrative of the Torah until chapter 6, when we are simply told that Amram married a woman from the house of Levi. It is only later, this later verse, that she is fully identified in the very center of her own family, the daughter of Levi and the mother of Moses, Aaron, and Miriam. A generation listed before her, a generation after her. She stands in the center of a larger story, pulling from the past, and pushing forward the future. Levi, her father, if you don't remember, is one of the two sons of Jacob who rose up to fight all of the town of Shechem when they learned that their sister Dinah had been assaulted. They, Shimon and Levi, refused to let one of their own be hurt or used by others. Their violent revolt may not have been the best way to address it, but Levi had a fierce protective streak in him. I find myself wondering if Yocheved ever heard the story of his father's actions in his youth. I wonder if she heard about the lengths that he went to protect his family, about his refusal to let his sister be used and discarded. I wonder if she experienced his protectiveness in her own childhood. I wonder when Yocheved plucks up the courage to build the little basket for her son, if she is drawing from the same sense of duty toward family and toward justice that her father seemed to display. If she begins to quietly act because she knew her father would have. She makes a future possible because someone insisted that it be possible for her. We are living in a world where sometimes hope can seem far away, hard to find. We may feel like too much is beyond our control and that we are being pushed down a slide into despair. But stories of others who acted when things were dire help us to find the courage to find it ourselves. Rebecca Slonit opens the introduction to the third edition of her book, Hope in the Dark, with the following. Your opponents would love for you to believe that it's hopeless, that you have no power, that there's no reason to act because you can't win. Hope is a gift that you do not have to surrender, a power that you don't have to throw away. Yocheved does not surrender her hope or throw it away. She did not believe herself powerless. She found the way to act despite oppression, despite danger, despite not knowing if her act of defiance would even work. I can only imagine the scenarios running through her head as she prepared that basket. The basket leaking, a taskmaster seeing a daughter of Pharaoh, seeing a baby and tossing him back into the water. But she did it anyway. Slonit further says, hope is an embrace of the unknown and the unknowable, an alternative to the certainty of both optimists and pessimists. Optimists think that it will all be fine without their involvement. Pessimists take the opposite position. Both excuse themselves from acting. Hope is the belief that what we do matters, even though how and when it may matter, who and what it may impact are not things that we get to know beforehand. We may not, in fact, know them afterward either, but they matter all the same, and history is full of people whose influence and was most powerful after they were gone. Yocheved, this initially unnamed woman, found agency, courage, and hope to act. I think our census also reminds us that she is a direct daughter of Levi because she inherits that drive to action from him. Without that drive and courage inherited from her father, learned from watching him, that gave her the hope that her behind the scenes start to a revolution could work, Passover Seder says we might still be slaves in Egypt. His story made hers, though he never knew how great she would be. Her story made possible that of Moses, of Aaron, and Miriam. Their stories made all of ours possible. It was first pointed out to me that Yocheved doesn't even get named until well after she'd already begun to sow the seeds of rebellion during a Devar Torah given by Rabbi Jan Urbach during the Rabbinic Training Institute in January of 2024. It was only a few months after October 7th, and hope was pretty thin on the ground, even for a group of rabbis. But then 4 chapters after she saves her son, we finally learn her name. This too, I think, is a message of hope. Things in our world may not look great right now. Some things may in fact look quite dire, but maybe Yocheved is already out there. Maybe she's already begun to act quietly and we won't learn of her until later. Maybe she's lining a teva with bitumen right now, ready to ensure that the next generation of our story will not drown. Maybe she's one of you, sitting here right now, remembering the courage or strength or resilience of your father. You're willing to take it on regardless of whether his always came out the way you'd have liked. Maybe she's you, ready to do your part to carry your grandmother's story forward. Maybe she's any one of us, remembering the stories and the strengths who've gone before us, who recognize in retrospect the tremendous impact that they had on our lives. She's anyone willing to take a risk, to let the past form a beautiful yet unknown future, because we recognize that we are what was once our ancestors' beautiful yet unknown future. The name of Amram's wife was Yocheved, daughter of Levi, who was born to Levi in Egypt. She bore to Amram, Aaron, and Moses, and their sister Miriam. Her father taught her to do everything one can for family. Then she bore her children, and she refused to let them be swallowed up by cruelty. She drew on the stories before her to ensure that the stories after her would not go unwritten. And so I think today, indeed, we are all of us, Yocheved, standing between the past and the future, drawing on the memories of those who were before us, reflecting on how they built us. Let those memories also drive us to continue their stories forward, paving the ways for those yet to be written. Let their stories be a source of inspiration and a reason not to give up hope, a reason to not give away your most precious gift. As we turn toward Yizkor, I find myself particularly grateful for that final census in the book of Numbers, the one that makes room, even if only by the briefest mention, for stories mixed in with the names. The one that not only lists names and numbers, it reminds us briefly of who some of them were. The one that doesn't leave an angry, grieving veteran yelling at a government interviewer in her 20s on his doorstep. The census that makes room for a woman sandwiched between 2 generations, who use stories of strength from the past to maintain that there always is quiet hope to inspire stories of the future. You've probably noticed, and Alan mentioned last night, we have a new yahrzeit board in our lobby this year. This digital board allows us to hold up the names of everyone in the congregation we are coming to remember today. And like the final census in the book of Numbers, it lists more than names and dates, even though those do seem like the main thing there. sandwiched in a verse between two generations. Each plaque has a story behind it, and the story of the life of those whom we love and lost. Parents, teachers, grandparents, aunts, uncles, brothers, sisters, children. That board, in some way, represents the census of our loss. As mentioned last night, it too can hold stories attached to the names, if you'd like it to. Both the ones in your heart when you see the names, or the written ones if you choose to add them to the record of our board. Because Judaism recognizes the deep need for stories of those who come before us. Indeed, stories are a key element of how we mourn. During Shiva, we sit together, sharing the stories of that life with one another. That storytelling preserves the memory of the lost person in the minds of the mourners and allows the mourners the opportunity to begin to heal. That storytelling helps the mourner to find that which their loved one taught them best, so that they can have the courage and the hope to keep their memory alive in this world. Yocheved remembers Levi, and she acts. Moses remembers Yocheved, and she holds her in the records for all of us. In a few moments, we'll stand in memory. We will hold the story of those who came before us and those who overlapped with us much too briefly. As you hold their stories, recognize how each of them contributed to the developing story that is you, the story that was, for them, a beautiful yet unknown future, a story not yet written, or just begun, just behind the scenes, and still a story of hope. May remembering the stories of those whom you've loved and lost help you to write the one that you were meant to become, help you to write the beautiful story of their future. I'll invite